The ancient Egyptian priests knew exactly what happens in the crucial 49 days after your heart stops beating. Their priests possessed detailed maps of exactly what happens in those crucial first 49 days. This wasn't some abstract theory. It was practical, life-altering knowledge, preserved in sacred texts attributed to Thoth, the god of wisdom, who served as scribe to the very cosmic order. For over 5,000 years, this secret was kept from the masses. Why? Because it unveils the truth. Death is not the end. It's the ultimate test. The ancient Egyptians understood that the soul's fate in those first moments after separation from the body determined whether it would achieve liberation or be trapped in another cycle of rebirth. Pharaohs devoted their entire lives preparing for this journey. What did they know that we don't? The answers lie buried in the shadows of history, and they could change everything you thought you knew about life and death. They studied in the ancient mystery schools, committing to memory the precise steps needed to navigate what lies beyond. Yet, we seldom devote any thought to what could be the most crucial 49 days of our existence. The moment consciousness leaves the body, the true journey begins. The ancient texts describe this transition with astonishing clarity. The final heartbeat reverberating in the chest, the last shallow breath escaping, followed by profound silence. But according to Thoth's sacred teachings, this physical end is only the beginning of consciousness's most profound journey. What happens next challenges everything our materialist worldview has led us to believe about awareness itself. Thoth reveals that consciousness doesn't simply disappear with the death of the body. Instead, it undergoes what can only be described as an ultimate awakening. Picture the moment you realize you're dreaming, that sudden clarity when dream logic fades and lucid awareness emerges, but on a scale far beyond any waking experience. In this new state, the consciousness finds itself free from the weight of physical matter, no longer tethered to the vibrations of the body. Thoth's texts explain that awareness remains sharp, perhaps even more vivid than it ever was while confined to the flesh. You observe your lifeless body with a detached curiosity, as if watching a scene from your own childhood movie. There's recognition without attachment, memory without the emotional weight that once accompanied it. This matches strikingly with modern accounts of those who've experienced clinical death and returned. Many describe a similar sense of liberated awareness, consciousness unfettered by the physical limitations of the brain. However, Thoth's account introduces a crucial distinction that no near-death experiencer can fully grasp. There's no silver cord, no physical tether to pull you back. The separation is final, irreversible. According to the Egyptian texts, what follows this separation shapes the entire course of the soul's journey in the afterlife. Thoth speaks of the emergence of the clear light of Ra, a radiance so brilliant, so overwhelmingly pure, that even gazing at the sun would seem like looking into a candle by comparison. This is not merely a bright light. It is pure consciousness itself made visible, the fundamental awareness from which all minds originate and to which they ultimately return. Here's where the texts reveal something extraordinary about the nature of reality itself. This clear light isn't some external divine presence judging the soul. It is the soul's own deepest nature, the pure awareness that was always present beneath layers of personality, memory, and conditioned thinking. Recognition of this truth in that crucial moment leads to what Thoth calls immediate liberation, complete freedom from the endless cycle of death and rebirth that traps most souls for millennia. But here's the tragic reality that Thoth's texts illuminate with painful clarity. Virtually no one passes this ultimate test. Lifetimes of conditioning have trained us to identify with our thoughts, our roles, our stories about who we are. When confronted with pure, formless consciousness, the habit patterns of the mind recoil in terror. It's too vast, too empty of the familiar landmarks we've used to navigate existence. So instead of recognizing this light as our own true nature, we instinctively pull away, seeking something more familiar to anchor our sense of identity. The moment this recoil occurs, Thoth explains, the soul begins to hear sounds, whispers, voices, sometimes thunderous roaring that seems to come from all directions. These aren't external phenomena but projections of the subconscious mind, desperate to create familiar reference points in this alien landscape of pure awareness. The texts describe how souls might suddenly hear the voice of their deceased mother calling their name, or see the radiant figure of whatever deity they worshipped in life approaching with outstretched arms. One particularly detailed passage describes a soul who spent years devoted to the goddess Isis, suddenly perceiving her beautiful form, emerging from the overwhelming light, offering comfort and guidance. Another account tells of a warrior seeing Horus in his falcon-headed glory, promising glory in the afterlife for his earthly service. What makes these descriptions so profound is Thoth's insistence that these figures, however convincing, are entirely mental constructs, projections of the soul's own expectations and conditioning. The deeper layers of Thoth's teachings about consciousness separation contain knowledge too sensitive for public platforms. That's why we share the most profound insights exclusively through our free Insights Academy newsletter, where you'll also receive a complimentary copy of the Kabbalion for a limited time. The texts reveal that this moment of choice, between recognizing the clear light as one's true nature or grasping at familiar mental projections, happens with lightning speed. There's no time for contemplation or gradual adjustment. Lifetimes of spiritual preparation either pay off in an instant of recognition or years of unconscious living pull the soul inexorably toward the comfort of known forms and concepts. What's particularly fascinating is how Thoth describes the quality of awareness during these crucial moments. Unlike the often foggy, dreamlike consciousness reported in many modern near-death accounts, the Egyptian texts emphasize that awareness becomes hyperacute, more vivid and clear than anything experienced in physical life. This isn't a diminished state, but consciousness finally freed from the filtering limitations of brain-based perception. The tragedy, according to these ancient teachings, is that this crystal-clear awareness works against most souls. They see the mental projections of deceased relatives and religious figures with such vivid detail that they appear absolutely real. The soul's enhanced perception makes these illusions completely convincing, drawing consciousness away from the formless, clear light toward increasingly complex and elaborate mental constructions. Once this initial moment passes, and Thoth emphasizes it happens within what we might consider seconds, the soul finds itself pulled inexorably into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This isn't a physical location but a realm of consciousness where the soul's own mental contents become the landscape it must navigate. Every fear, every attachment, every unresolved emotional pattern from life becomes an actual entity or obstacle in this psychic terrain. The failure to recognize the clear light of RA immediately upon death sets in motion the complex 49-day journey through increasingly challenging stages of the afterlife. What could have been instant liberation becomes instead an elaborate test of consciousness where the soul must confront and transcend every aspect of its conditioned identity before it can achieve the freedom that was initially offered in that first overwhelming moment of divine radiance. This is where Thoth's manual becomes invaluable, not just as a map of what lies ahead, but as preparation for that crucial instant when everything hangs in the balance between eternal freedom and continued bondage to the wheel of death and rebirth. Now we arrive at perhaps the most extraordinary revelation in Thoth's teachings, the do-it itself. Forget everything you think you know about the afterlife from movies, religious sermons, or near-death experience books. The ancient Egyptians understood something that modern spirituality has completely missed. Death isn't a destination. It's an intensive 49-day examination designed by cosmic intelligence to determine whether your consciousness is ready for true liberation. Thoth describes the do-it not as some mystical realm floating in the clouds, but as a sophisticated testing ground where the fundamental laws of reality operate completely differently than anything we experience while alive. Time becomes fluid and unpredictable. What feels like moments of terror can stretch into what seems like eternities, while entire days of profound learning compress into experiences that feel like seconds. Your consciousness, now without the anchor of a physical body, without vocal cords to speak, without hands to touch, exists as pure awareness. Yet here's what catches almost every soul off guard. Most don't immediately realize they've died. Think about the implications of this. You're suddenly operating with only the raw essence of your consciousness, but your mind is still trying to make sense of reality using the same patterns it developed over decades of physical existence. The do-it responds to this confusion by becoming a shifting, unstable realm where your thoughts don't just influence reality. They instantly become reality. Every suppressed emotion from your earthly life, every unresolved fear, every hidden desire suddenly takes tangible form around you. The ancient texts reveal that this 49-day journey unfolds in precise, measurable stages, each one designed to test different aspects of your soul's development. The early days present what Thoth calls the attachment trials. Your consciousness, still oriented toward physical existence, desperately attempts to return to familiar earthly locations. You find yourself drawn back to your home, trying to sit in your favorite chair, attempting to return to your workplace, visiting places that held special meaning during your life. But here's where the first major shock occurs. You try frantically to communicate with your living family members, friends, colleagues, anyone who might acknowledge your presence and confirm that you still exist. You might stand right next to your spouse, speaking directly to them, reaching out to touch their shoulder, only to realize they cannot see you, cannot hear you, cannot feel your presence. This creates the first profound realization that cuts through any remaining denial. Your old life is truly, permanently over. Thoth emphasizes that your mental state during these early days determines everything that follows in your journey through the do-it. Souls who can accept the reality of death with equanimity, who can release their attachment to physical existence without prolonged resistance, find themselves moving smoothly through the do-it's challenges. The testing becomes a natural unfolding of wisdom rather than a series of traumatic confrontations. But souls who resist this new reality through denial, anger, or desperate attachment to their former life create increasingly difficult obstacles for themselves. The do-it, responding to their consciousness, manifests more challenging scenarios designed to break through their resistance. What could be a gentle awakening becomes a harsh confrontation with truth. During these early stages, Thoth describes the appearance of the first guides, beings of radiant light, that he identifies not as external entities but as aspects of the soul's own higher consciousness. These figures often appear in forms that would be recognizable and comforting to the deceased. Egyptian deities like Isis with her protective wings, Osiris representing death and rebirth, or Horus embodying the triumph of consciousness over ignorance. Here's where Thoth reveals a crucial insight that most spiritual teachings completely miss. These luminous beings offer profound wisdom and direction, but only to souls capable of recognizing them as projections of their own internal wisdom rather than external saviors to be worshipped. This represents one of the most sophisticated psychological concepts in ancient Egyptian spirituality, the understanding that true spiritual guidance must ultimately come from within. Most souls, however, conditioned by earthly religious beliefs that taught them to seek salvation from external sources, make a fundamental error. They mistake these projections for literal gods or divine beings existing outside themselves. Instead of integrating the wisdom these figures represent, they fall into familiar patterns of worship, supplication, and dependency. They beg these beings for rescue, for special treatment, for shortcuts through the testing process. This misunderstanding sets up the more challenging tests that await in the deeper stages of the do-it. By failing to recognize their own inner wisdom when it appears in its most accessible form, these souls demonstrate they're not yet ready for the advanced teachings that lie ahead. The do-it responds by creating more intensive scenarios designed to break through their external orientation and force them to discover their own inner resources. What makes Thoth's description so remarkably sophisticated is his understanding that everything experienced in the do-it, every vision, every encounter, every challenge, every moment of terror or transcendence, is simultaneously a reflection of the individual soul's consciousness and part of a universal structure governed by cosmic law. The journey is deeply personal because it's built from the unique psychological material of each soul's earthly experience, yet it follows predictable patterns because consciousness itself operates according to discoverable principles. This means that while no two souls experience identical journeys through the do-it, the fundamental stages and types of testing remain consistent. The cosmic intelligence that designed this system understands both the individual nature of consciousness and the universal laws that govern spiritual development. The question becomes, will you recognize your own inner wisdom when it appears? Or will you spend your 49 days searching outside yourself for salvation that can only come from within? Picture this. You've been moving through the do-it for what feels like hours, maybe days. Time operates differently in this realm between worlds. The initial shock of separation from your physical body has settled into something else entirely. The landscape around you begins to shift, and suddenly you're not alone anymore. She appears first as a shimmer of golden light, then solidifies into the most beautiful being you've ever encountered. Isis, the Great Mother, approaches with arms outstretched, her presence radiating a love so pure it makes every earthly relationship pale in comparison. When she looks at you, it's as if she sees directly into your soul, not judging, not evaluating, just accepting you completely for who you are. The relief is overwhelming. After a lifetime of feeling misunderstood, criticized, or having to prove your worth, here stands a divine being who loves you unconditionally. But here's where Thoth's teaching becomes revolutionary and, frankly, disturbing to most people who first encounter it. This magnificent being, this goddess who seems more real than anything you've experienced in physical life, isn't actually Isis at all. She's you, or more precisely, she's your own divine feminine aspect, your capacity for unconditional love and nurturing wisdom, projected outward and reflected back as a seemingly separate entity. The communication doesn't happen through words. Instead, understanding flows directly from her consciousness to yours. She shows you visions of eternal peace, promises of safety, glimpses of a paradise where all struggle ends. You could rest here forever, she seems to suggest, protected and cherished beyond measure. For souls carrying the weight of earthly trauma, guilt, or exhaustion, this offer feels like the ultimate salvation. Then Thoth himself might appear, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, his eyes holding the accumulated knowledge of eons. When he speaks, it's not through sound but through direct transmission of understanding that bypasses your rational mind entirely. Complex cosmic principles become crystal clear. The mysteries that puzzled you during earthly life suddenly make perfect sense. He offers to be your eternal teacher, your guide through infinite realms of knowledge and understanding. Or perhaps Horus manifests, the falcon-headed protector, emanating such power and strength that you feel invincible in his presence. Every fear you carried from earthly life, fear of failure, abandonment, death itself, dissolves under his protective gaze. He offers to shield you from all harm, to be your eternal guardian and champion. These encounters feel more real than reality itself. The beings radiate such authenticity, such divine presence, that questioning their external existence seems not just impossible but almost blasphemous. Most souls, conditioned by lifetimes of religious training that emphasizes external deities and saviors, fall immediately into devotional worship. They prostrate themselves before these magnificent beings, grateful beyond measure for this divine intervention. And that's exactly where the trap closes. According to Thoth's teaching, these divine figures represent the soul's own highest potentials, its capacity for unconditional love, infinite wisdom, protective power, and spiritual mastery. They're not external saviors but internal qualities that the consciousness has developed over many lifetimes, now reflected back as seemingly separate entities. If the soul recognizes this truth and integrates these qualities rather than worshiping them externally, it can transcend the entire testing process of the Due. But recognition requires a level of spiritual maturity that most souls haven't achieved. It demands the courage to claim your own divinity rather than seeking salvation from external sources. It means taking responsibility for your own spiritual development instead of depending on divine intervention. When souls fail this recognition test, when they choose devotional worship over integration, something unsettling begins to happen. The beautiful faces of the goddesses start to flicker like a television with poor reception. Their perfect forms become unstable, shifting and wavering as if reality itself is glitching. The overwhelming love in their eyes wavers, replaced momentarily by something else, emptiness, perhaps, or a kind of cosmic indifference. This instability terrifies souls who are seeking external security rather than internal mastery. They reach out desperately, trying to hold on to these divine figures, begging them not to disappear. But the more frantically they grasp, the more unstable the visions become. The gods and goddesses begin to fade, their comforting presence dissolving like morning mist. What replaces them is far more disturbing. The same divine beings return but now in their wrathful aspects. The terrifying forms depicted in Egyptian temple art that most people assume are just symbolic representations. Set appears with his strange, angular head and wild eyes, embodying pure chaos and destruction. But he's not just some external demon. He's the soul's own unresolved anger, its capacity for violence and revenge, its shadow aspects that were never acknowledged or integrated during earthly life. Sekhmet manifests as a lioness-headed goddess with eyes like burning coals, her breath scorching the very air of the Duar. She represents the soul's own uncontrolled rage, its capacity for destruction when wounded or threatened. The more the soul fights against her presence or tries to flee, the more powerful and persistent she becomes. Apep, the great serpent of dissolution, might rise from the depths not as some cosmic evil force but as the soul's own fear of non-existence, its terror of losing individual identity and dissolving back into the universal consciousness from which it emerged. These wrathful deities don't speak in the gentle, loving tones of their benevolent counterparts. Their voices shake the very foundations of the Duart, commanding attention and demanding acknowledgement. They force the soul to confront everything it tried to avoid, suppress, or deny during earthly existence. The key insight in Thoth's teaching is that both the beautiful and terrifying visions are self-created projections. The loving goddesses and the wrathful demons are equally illusory. They're different aspects of the soul's own consciousness, reflected back through the sophisticated mirror of the Duart's testing environment. The only way to dissolve these visions, both the seductive and the terrifying ones, is to stop feeding them with emotional energy. Whether that energy is devotional love or paralyzing fear makes no difference. Both responses give the projections power and keep the soul trapped in the testing ground. This understanding completely revolutionizes how we approach spiritual development, even while still in physical form. Instead of seeking external saviors or fearing external demons, we begin to recognize both as aspects of our own consciousness that require integration and mastery. The implications are staggering. Every spiritual tradition, every religion promising external salvation or warning about external damnation, might be missing the deeper truth that Thoth encoded in these ancient texts. The real spiritual work isn't about pleasing gods or defeating demons. It's about recognizing and integrating all aspects of your own divine nature. After weeks of navigating the Duart's elaborate illusions and confronting the projections of their own consciousness, the soul arrives at what Thoth describes as the most crucial moment in the entire 49-day journey. This is the weighing of the heart. But everything you think you know about this process is wrong. Popular culture has turned this profound spiritual teaching into a simplistic courtroom drama. We imagine external judges sitting in judgment, weighing our deeds on cosmic scales, while we stand helplessly awaiting verdict. The truth Thoth reveals is far more sophisticated and, frankly, more terrifying. There are no external judges because none are needed. Consciousness itself is the ultimate recorder, witness, and experiencer of every single moment of your earthly existence. The Hall of Two Truths isn't a physical location you arrive at after death. It's a state of consciousness where self-deception becomes impossible. Think about how easily we lie to ourselves during life. We rationalize cruel words as honesty, justify selfish actions as necessary, or convince ourselves that small betrayals don't matter. In this state of consciousness, every comfortable lie we've told ourselves simply dissolves. Here's where Thoth's role becomes fascinating. As the divine scribe, he hasn't been watching you from some celestial surveillance system. Instead, Thoth represents the natural recording function of consciousness itself. Every thought you've had, every word you've spoken, Every action you've taken has created an indelible imprint on the fabric of your soul's essence. Nothing is forgotten because consciousness cannot forget itself. What unfolds next defies our normal understanding of memory and experience. The soul doesn't simply remember its past life, like flipping through a photo album. Instead, it experiences the entire lifetime simultaneously from multiple perspectives. Every moment of your existence becomes present and immediate. But here's the profound twist. You experience it not just from your own perspective, but from the perspective of every person you affected. Remember that harsh comment you made to a coworker 15 years ago. You don't just remember saying it. You experience the sting of those words exactly as your coworker felt them. You feel their confusion, their hurt, the way it made them question their competence for weeks afterward. That moment when you helped a stranger with directions when they were lost. You experience their relief, their gratitude, the way your simple kindness brightened their entire day and made them more likely to help someone else. This isn't punishment. It's education in the most direct form possible. The soul learns the true interconnectedness of all consciousness through immediate, undeniable experience. Some souls find this review absolutely blissful. A mother who spent years patiently nurturing her children experiences not just her own love, but feels the deep security and confidence her patience created in each child. She experiences how that security rippled outward, affecting how those children treated others, how they approached challenges, how they learned to love. Every moment of patience returns to her magnified through the lives it touched. But consider a different scenario. A businessman who built his wealth through deliberate deception experiences, not just his own satisfaction at closing deals, but the crushing disappointment of every client who trusted him. He feels the financial stress of families who lost money because of his lies, experiences the sleepless nights of people who question their own judgment after being manipulated. He feels the cynicism that grew in hearts that had once been trusting, the way his actions contributed to a world where people became more suspicious and less open. The process reveals something profound about the nature of reality itself. Every action creates what Thoth calls resonance patterns, waves of consequence that extend far beyond what we can see during earthly life. A teacher who truly believes in a struggling student doesn't just help that child pass a test. The teacher experiences how that belief became a foundation of self-worth that supported the child through decades of challenges, influenced their career choices, affected how they raised their own children. Conversely, a parent who consistently dismissed a child's dreams experiences the slow erosion of that child's confidence, feels the moments throughout that person's life when they held back from opportunities, experiences the relationships that suffered because the child learned not to trust their own instincts. This is why Thoth describes the heart becoming heavy or light. It's not about moral judgment from external authorities. It's about the accumulated weight of unresolved guilt, attachment, and resistance to truth that the soul carries. Some souls experiencing the full impact of their choices feel profound remorse for harm caused. Others feel overwhelming gratitude for opportunities to love and serve. But here's the crucial point. Both experiences are necessary for the soul's evolution. The feather of Mart represents perfect balance and truth, the soul's own recognition of cosmic harmony. Those whose consciousness remains heavy with unresolved emotions, with attachments to earthly identity, with resistance to accepting the full truth of their existence, cannot proceed to the liberation that awaits beyond the doer. They're magnetically drawn back toward another earthly incarnation, pulled by the very emotions and attachments they haven't resolved. But Thoth reveals something even more profound. This life review doesn't just affect the past. It actually determines the soul's future trajectory. The magnetic pull of unresolved emotions, unlearned lessons, and incomplete understanding draws the soul towards specific circumstances in future lives. A soul that experienced the pain of causing suffering through dishonesty might be drawn to circumstances where integrity becomes the central challenge. A soul that felt the joy of nurturing others might be drawn toward opportunities for even greater service. The implications of Thoth's teaching are staggering. Every moment of your current life is creating the very experiences your consciousness will face after death. You're not just living for today. You're literally creating the content of your own cosmic education. The way you treat others today becomes the way you'll experience yourself tomorrow, magnified and reflected back through the consciousness of everyone you affect. This understanding transforms how we view every interaction, every choice, every moment of our earthly existence. We're not just temporary beings having brief experiences, we're eternal consciousness creating the very curriculum for our own evolution. After experiencing the profound truth of the life review, souls find themselves at the most critical crossroads of their entire existence. Those who have accepted what they witnessed, who have genuinely processed the reality of their earthly actions without resistance, experience a lightness that's almost impossible to describe. But for the vast majority, and Thoth's writings are brutally honest about this, the soul emerges from the life review carrying tremendous weight. Not the weight of divine judgment, but something far more binding, the weight of their own unresolved attachments, their unfinished emotional business, their desperate clinging to what they believe they still need. This is where Thoth's teachings become particularly fascinating, because he describes how the soul's own consciousness becomes its prison. The beings we encountered earlier, those divine projections of our own expectations, they fade away now. What remains is raw, unfiltered desire, and it begins to manifest in ways that most souls find completely irresistible. Picture this: you're a consciousness that spent decades accumulating wealth, defining your worth through material possessions, measuring success by what you owned rather than who you became. During the life review, you witnessed every moment when money became more important than relationships, when greed overshadowed generosity, when fear of poverty drove you to hoard rather than share. If you resisted these truths, if you justified these behaviors or refused to accept their spiritual consequences, that resistance creates what Thoth calls karmic magnetism. Suddenly, you begin experiencing vivid, almost overwhelming visions of earthly life. But these aren't random memories. They're specifically designed by your own consciousness to trigger your deepest attachments. The soul obsessed with wealth might see scenes of incredible luxury, opportunities for financial success, or conversely, situations of desperate poverty that trigger their fear-based relationship with money. These visions feel more real than anything the soul experienced during its journey through the Duat. Thoth explains that a soul trapped in anger follows a similar pattern. During life, perhaps you carried rage at injustices, resentment toward people who wronged you, fury at circumstances beyond your control. The life review showed you how this anger poisoned your relationships, clouded your judgment, prevented you from experiencing genuine peace. If you couldn't accept responsibility for nurturing that anger, if you maintained that your rage was justified and necessary, then your consciousness becomes magnetically drawn to situations that will either trigger that anger again or potentially resolve it. The visions intensify. You see people who remind you of those who hurt you. You witness injustices that make your non-physical consciousness burn with familiar fury. You observe situations where you could finally get revenge, or, alternatively, where you might learn the lessons that anger was meant to teach you. The soul doesn't understand the difference. It only knows it feels compelled, drawn like metal to a magnet. Here's what makes this process so insidious. The soul, still not fully comprehending its situation, begins to emotionally invest in these visions. It sees opportunities for comfort, love, success, pleasure, justice, or revenge, and starts believing these experiences will finally provide what it's been seeking. This emotional investment, this desperate wanting, becomes the actual mechanism that traps the soul in reincarnation. Thoth describes the process with remarkable precision. As the soul's longing intensifies, as it becomes more attached to the possibility of earthly experience, it begins to perceive couples in the act of conception. This isn't voyeurism, it's karmic resonance. The soul is drawn to parents whose emotional patterns, unresolved issues, and spiritual development match its own unfinished business. A soul trapped in patterns of abandonment will be drawn to parents who will recreate those patterns. A consciousness obsessed with control will find parents whose dynamics will either enable that obsession or force it to confront its limitations. The moment is both instant and irreversible. When the soul fully commits to any earthly desire, when it decides that physical experience offers what it needs for fulfillment, it's immediately pulled into a developing embryo. All memory of the do-it vanishes. All awareness of its spiritual journey disappears. The consciousness that just spent 49 days discovering profound truths about existence becomes completely identified with a developing physical body, beginning another cycle of earthly life with no conscious memory of why it's there. But Thoth also describes souls who respond differently, those who observe these same visions without emotional investment. These consciousness have learned what the Egyptians called detachment, though it's not the cold indifference we might imagine. Instead, it's a profound understanding that all earthly experiences are temporary phenomena, that no physical circumstance can provide what the soul truly seeks. These souls watch the visions of earthly life with the same detached awareness they applied to the divine projections earlier in their journey. They see opportunities for wealth without craving it. They witness potential relationships without desperately needing them. They observe situations that would trigger their old emotional patterns without being compelled to resolve them through reincarnation. This detachment keeps them free to choose their path consciously rather than being dragged unconsciously into another lifetime. Using Egyptian metaphysical concepts, Thoth explains that different aspects of consciousness can become trapped at different levels. The car, your vital essence, your life force, might be ready to move beyond earthly existence, while your bar, your personality, your individual identity remains desperately attached to familiar patterns and experiences. This creates internal conflict within the soul with different aspects of consciousness pulling in different directions. What makes this teaching particularly profound is Thoth's insistence that reincarnation isn't punishment, it's opportunity. Each earthly life offers chances to resolve unfinished spiritual business, to develop greater wisdom, to finally learn the lessons that will lead to genuine freedom. The tragedy is that most souls enter new lives completely unconscious of their spiritual purpose. They repeat similar patterns, make similar mistakes, and develop similar attachments, creating an endless cycle that continues until they develop enough awareness to break free. The pull toward reincarnation reaches its peak in the final days of the 49-day journey. This is when karmic forces are strongest, when unresolved desires become most compelling, when the soul's choices determine whether it continues cycling through physical existence or finally breaks free into something far greater. Understanding this process isn't just ancient history, it's practical wisdom for how we live right now, because every attachment we form, every desire we refuse to examine, every emotional pattern we leave unresolved is creating the very forces that will determine our soul's journey after death. Now we arrive at the most extraordinary revelation in Thoth's teachings, the secret that transforms everything we thought we knew about death, rebirth, and the very nature of existence itself. After documenting thousands of souls passing through the weighing of the heart, after observing countless beings pulled back into reincarnation by their unresolved desires, Thoth discovered something remarkable. A rare few souls, perhaps 1 in 10,000, achieved something that defied the entire cosmic order as most understood it. They broke free completely. But here's what's fascinating. Liberation wasn't a reward these souls earned through perfect behavior or flawless moral conduct. It wasn't handed out by divine judges impressed with their earthly accomplishments. Instead, Thoth observed that liberation emerged as a natural consequence when consciousness finally recognized what it had always been. Think about this carefully. Every challenge throughout the 49-day journey through the Duar, every terrifying guardian, every bewildering transformation, every moment of apparent dissolution served a single, elegant purpose. Each experience was designed to help the soul distinguish between two fundamental aspects of its existence: the temporary, conditioned identity it had worn during earthly life and its eternal, unconditioned essence that had never actually been born and could never truly die. The souls who successfully navigated toward liberation shared remarkable characteristics that set them apart from the vast majority. When they encountered the blazing clear light of RA at the moment of death, instead of recoiling in fear or confusion, they approached it with curiosity. They investigated rather than fled. When magnificent divine beings appeared in all their overwhelming glory, these rare souls didn't immediately fall into worship or submission. They sought to understand what these beings represented, recognizing them as aspects of their own deeper nature rather than external authorities. Most tellingly, when the wrathful deities manifested, those terrifying forms that sent most souls scrambling for familiar ground, the liberation-bound souls looked for the message rather than fleeing from the messenger. They understood intuitively that these fierce appearances were not punishments or threats, but teachings encoded in symbolic form. Thoth documented the final test that ultimately determined liberation, and it's nothing like what most spiritual traditions teach. At the deepest point of the journey, all illusions finally fall away. Every identity, every memory, every sense of individual selfhood dissolves completely. The soul faces what appears to be pure emptiness, the void before creation, the darkness that preceded the first dawn, the silence before the first word was spoken. This moment reveals everything. Most souls, confronted with this apparent nothingness, panic completely. They desperately seek something to cling to, some fragment of identity to maintain, some familiar form to inhabit. The terror of complete dissolution drives them to grasp at any available incarnation, pulling them inevitably back into the cycle of birth and death. But liberated souls respond differently. They recognize this emptiness not as annihilation, but as the source of all existence, the consciousness from which all experiences arise and into which they naturally dissolve. They see the void not as their destruction but as their true home. Here's the profound paradox. Thoth discovered, by fully accepting the dissolution of individual identity, these souls discover their true identity as universal consciousness itself. It's like discovering that the wave was never separate from the ocean, that the flame was never apart from the fire. The ancient texts illustrate this using powerful Egyptian symbolism. Consider the phoenix, which must burn completely to ash, not partially but totally, before being reborn as pure spirit. Or contemplate Ra's nightly journey through the underworld, where the sun god appears to die completely each evening, only to emerge transformed at dawn, renewed and radiant. Liberation, according to Thoth's deepest teachings, doesn't mean graduating to some elevated heavenly realm where enlightened souls spend eternity in blissful retirement. That's a fundamental misunderstanding that keeps many seekers trapped in spiritual materialism. True liberation is the recognition that the soul never was separate from the cosmic consciousness that creates and sustains all reality. Liberated souls don't go somewhere else. They realize they were never anywhere else. They don't gain immortality. They recognize they were never mortal. The individual identity that seems so solid and permanent during earthly life is revealed to have been like a dream character, vivid and compelling within the dream, but ultimately just another temporary formation within eternal awareness. This realization retrospectively illuminates the entire earthly experience. Every challenge, every loss, every moment of confusion or pain is revealed to have been perfectly designed to develop the wisdom needed for this ultimate recognition. The difficult relationships that forced growth beyond comfortable patterns, the failures that dissolved false identities, the losses that revealed what could never be taken away, all of it served the soul's journey toward remembering its true nature. But here's where many people misunderstand liberation completely. They imagine it as an escape from existence, a withdrawal from responsibility, a kind of cosmic retirement plan for advanced souls. Thoth's observations reveal the opposite. Liberated consciousness often chooses to return to earthly existence, but now as conscious agents of cosmic evolution rather than unconscious victims of karmic compulsion. These are the great teachers, healers, and wisdom bringers who appear throughout history, beings who have transcended the need for reincarnation, but return anyway out of compassion for those still trapped in the cycle. They come back not because they must, but because they choose to serve the awakening of universal consciousness through individual forms. The Egyptian texts describe these liberated beings as companions of Ra, souls who have merged their individual will with cosmic intelligence and now participate consciously in the ongoing creation of reality. They might incarnate as humble craftsmen or influential leaders, as mystics or scientists, but they carry within them the unshakable knowledge of what they truly are. What makes this teaching so revolutionary is its accessibility. Liberation isn't reserved for a special class of superior souls or dependent on rare genetic gifts. It's possible for any consciousness willing to release attachment to limited identity and embrace the truth of what it really is. Not the temporary personality that lived one earthly life, but the eternal awareness that experiences all lives, dreams all dreams, and knows itself as the very source of existence itself. The question that emerges from Thoth's teaching is profound. If liberation is possible, if the cycle can be transcended, what does that mean for how we approach this current life? The answer transforms everything about how we understand our purpose here and now. The most profound truths have always been the most carefully guarded. When we examine why Thoth's teachings about the 49-day journey remained locked within the highest echelons of Egyptian mystery schools for millennia, we discover something far more sophisticated than simple elitist secrecy. This was practical wisdom born from deep understanding of human psychology and the delicate balance required to maintain civilization itself. The Egyptian priesthood recognized something that modern society has largely forgotten. Knowledge without proper preparation is not just useless, it's dangerous. These weren't arbitrary gatekeepers hoarding power for personal gain. They were guardians who understood that revealing the true nature of death and consciousness to unprepared minds could fundamentally destabilize everything that held their world together. Think about what Thoth's teachings actually revealed. Death is not final. Consciousness persists beyond the physical body. Each individual is ultimately responsible for their own spiritual destiny. The journey through the afterlife depends entirely on the choices and preparations made during earthly life. Now imagine if this knowledge had been broadcast freely throughout ancient Egyptian society without any context or preparation. The immediate consequence would have been the collapse of every fear-based control mechanism that maintained social order. Why follow pharaonic decrees if death holds no real threat? Why accumulate wealth if material possessions become meaningless the moment consciousness separates from the body? Why maintain social responsibilities if the only thing that truly matters is individual spiritual development? The priests understood that such knowledge, released indiscriminately, would create chaos rather than enlightenment. People might become reckless with their lives, viewing physical existence as merely a brief inconvenience before the real journey begins. Others might abandon their earthly duties entirely, believing they had transcended human limitations simply by possessing intellectual knowledge about the afterlife. History provides us with sobering examples of what happens when profound spiritual knowledge gets misunderstood or partially revealed. The Gnostic movements of the early Christian period often devolved into nihilistic cults that rejected all material existence as inherently evil. Various mystery religions throughout the Mediterranean world attracted followers who became so obsessed with achieving spiritual experiences that they lost all grounding in practical reality. In medieval Europe, whenever fragments of ancient wisdom traditions surfaced without proper context, they frequently spawned dangerous movements. People would interpret partial truths through their existing belief systems, creating distorted teachings that led to everything from mass hysteria to violent revolutionary movements. The Egyptian approach was radically different. They developed the most sophisticated initiation system the ancient world had ever seen. Candidates didn't simply study these teachings intellectually. They underwent years, sometimes decades, of preparation designed to fundamentally transform their consciousness before receiving the deepest revelations. The process began with rigorous moral development. Initiates had to demonstrate not just understanding but embodiment of principles like truthfulness, compassion, and detachment from material concerns. They lived these virtues until they became second nature, creating a stable foundation that could handle profound spiritual knowledge without becoming unbalanced. Physical preparation was equally important. Candidates underwent purification practices, dietary restrictions, and breathing techniques that gradually refined their nervous systems. The priests understood that consciousness exists at multiple levels and accessing higher dimensions of awareness required specific physiological preparations. The most intense phase involved direct experiential training. Initiates were placed in sealed chambers within temple complexes, often underground passages designed to simulate the journey through the Due. They would spend days in complete darkness, learning to navigate altered states of consciousness while maintaining clarity and purpose. These weren't mere symbolic exercises. They were practical training for the actual death experience. During these trials, candidates directly encountered the same disorienting forces they would face during the 49-day journey. They learned to recognize the pull of familiar attachments, the confusion of transitional states, and the subtle influences that could trap consciousness in endless cycles of rebirth. Most importantly, they developed the inner stability necessary to make conscious choices during these critical moments. Even within the priesthood itself, knowledge was carefully stratified. Junior priests might understand the basic principles of consciousness survival, while only the highest initiates received complete instruction about navigating the afterlife realms. This wasn't arbitrary hierarchy. It reflected the recognition that each level of understanding required specific preparation and maturity. The priests also understood timing on an individual level. They recognized that each soul has its own natural rhythm for receiving different aspects of truth. Forced revelation before genuine readiness often created confusion rather than enlightenment. Some candidates might spend years mastering basic meditation techniques before advancing to deeper teachings about the nature of consciousness itself. This wisdom extended to their preservation methods. The complete teachings were never recorded in a single location or format. Instead, they were distributed across multiple systems, encoded hieroglyphic texts, architectural designs embedded in pyramid and temple construction, oral traditions passed between master and student, and symbolic artwork that revealed its secrets only to properly trained eyes. The decline of Egyptian civilization created exactly the problems the ancient priests had anticipated. As the mystery schools collapsed and political upheavals scattered the priesthood, these carefully integrated teachings became fragmented. Pieces surfaced in various traditions: Greek philosophy, early Christianity, Islamic mysticism, medieval alchemy, but rarely in their complete, properly contextualized form. Without the supporting framework of gradual initiation and experiential preparation, later civilizations often misinterpreted these fragments. The profound psychological insights about consciousness and death became either overly intellectualized philosophical concepts or superstitious religious dogma, losing their practical transformative power. The Egyptian approach offers us crucial wisdom for our own time. As we rediscover these ancient teachings about consciousness and the afterlife, we must ask ourselves, are we prepared to handle such knowledge responsibly? The priests understood that true wisdom isn't just about knowing. It's about becoming capable of living that knowledge in a way that serves both individual development and collective well-being. Their millennia-long guardianship wasn't about withholding truth, but about ensuring that when these profound revelations finally emerged, they would find minds prepared to receive them with the wisdom and maturity they demand. What the ancient Egyptian priesthood understood intuitively 5,000 years ago, modern science is now documenting with remarkable precision. The convergence between Thoth's teachings about consciousness and death with today's cutting-edge research isn't just coincidental. It's revolutionary evidence that our ancestors possessed profound insights into the nature of human awareness that we're only beginning to rediscover. Dr. Raymond Moody's groundbreaking research on near-death experiences has documented thousands of cases where clinically dead patients report strikingly consistent phenomena. They describe leaving their physical bodies, moving through tunnels of light, encountering luminous beings, experiencing comprehensive life reviews, and ultimately choosing whether to return to earthly life or continue their journey. When you compare these modern accounts with Thoth's detailed descriptions of the soul's passage through the Duar, the parallels are undeniable. Dr. Dade Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia has spent decades studying these experiences, finding that people from completely different cultural backgrounds report nearly identical stages of consciousness transition. They describe the same heightened awareness immediately after death that Thoth wrote about, that moment when the soul suddenly perceives reality with crystal clarity, freed from the limitations of physical brain function. These aren't hallucinations or oxygen-deprived fantasies. These are coherent, transformative experiences that follow the exact progression Thoth mapped out in his secret texts. Perhaps even more compelling is Dr. Tur Eben Alexander's case. As a Harvard neurosurgeon, he approached consciousness from a purely materialist perspective until his own near-death experience during a week-long coma. His detailed account of encountering guide entities, receiving knowledge about the nature of existence, and understanding that consciousness operates independently of brain activity reads like a modern translation of ancient Egyptian afterlife literature. The quantum physics revolution has opened doorways to understanding consciousness that the Egyptian priesthood would immediately recognize. When researchers demonstrate that observation literally affects reality at the subatomic level, they're proving what Thoth taught, that consciousness shapes experience, especially in the afterlife realms where thought becomes reality instantaneously. The famous double-slit experiment shows that particles behave differently when observed, suggesting that awareness itself is a fundamental force in creating reality. Dr. Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff have proposed quantum consciousness theories, suggesting that human awareness operates through quantum processes in brain microtubules. Their research indicates that consciousness isn't produced by the brain, but rather channeled through it, exactly what Egyptian texts claimed when they described the soul as an eternal entity temporarily inhabiting physical form. When the body dies, this quantum consciousness continues, maintaining coherence and memory as it transitions through what Thoth called the 49-day journey. Neuroscience research has revealed something extraordinary about brain activity during clinical death. Dr. Jimo Borjagin's studies at the University of Michigan show that brain activity actually increases in areas associated with consciousness immediately after cardiac arrest. The dying brain exhibits gamma-wave patterns associated with heightened awareness and vivid experiences, precisely what Thoth described as the soul's enhanced perception upon leaving the physical body. Even more fascinating is the phenomenon of terminal lucidity, where people with severe dementia or brain damage suddenly become completely coherent and aware shortly before death. These cases suggest that consciousness operates beyond brain function, temporarily reconnecting with full awareness as death approaches. This mirrors the Egyptian understanding that death liberates consciousness from physical limitations rather than ending it. Shared death experiences provide independent verification of postmortem consciousness states. Dr. Raymond Moody has documented cases where healthy individuals report accompanying dying loved ones partway into the afterlife, experiencing the same tunnels of light, encounters with deceased relatives, and panoramic life reviews. These witnesses return with detailed accounts that match both the dying person's reported experience and ancient Egyptian descriptions of the afterlife journey. Dr. Pim van Lommel's extensive research in the Netherlands has documented verified out-of-body perceptions during clinical death, patients accurately describing events in distant hospital rooms while their brains showed no measurable activity. Dr. Sampani's AWARE studies continue gathering evidence that consciousness persists and perceives during cardiac arrest. When conventional neuroscience insists awareness should be impossible, Modern psychology's understanding of projection and archetypal imagery aligns perfectly with Thoth's teaching that afterlife visions manifest from the soul's own consciousness. Carl Jung's work on the collective unconscious revealed universal symbols and patterns that transcend individual experience. The same archetypal realm Egyptian texts describe as the foundation of afterlife encounters. Therapeutic techniques like life review in psychology mirror the Egyptian understanding of consciousness examining its earthly actions. Modern therapy recognizes that healing often involves witnessing one's life with compassion and understanding, exactly the process Thoth described as essential for spiritual evolution after death. Meditation research has documented brain states that transcend normal waking consciousness, supporting Egyptian practices of preparing for death through altered states. Studies show that experienced meditators can access awareness that operates independently of typical brain function, suggesting consciousness has dimensions beyond physical neural activity. The emerging scientific understanding of morphic fields and collective consciousness resonates with Egyptian teachings about the interconnectedness of all awareness. Researchers like Rupert Sheldrake propose that consciousness creates information fields that transcend individual minds, a concept that would be completely familiar to ancient Egyptian priests, who understood the soul's connection to universal consciousness. Yet mainstream materialism continues resisting these findings, much like the ancient priesthood's caution about releasing profound knowledge prematurely. The scientific establishment's reluctance to embrace consciousness research parallels the Egyptian priests' understanding that certain truths require careful preparation and wisdom to integrate safely. Modern humanity may finally be reaching the maturity to integrate these ancient wisdoms with scientific understanding, potentially revolutionizing our approach to life, death, and consciousness development. The convergence of Thoth's 50-year-old insights with cutting-edge research suggests we're standing at the threshold of a new era, one where ancient wisdom and modern science unite to transform our understanding of human existence and our journey beyond physical death. Now we arrive at the most crucial teaching Thoth left us, and it's one that completely transforms how we understand the purpose of our earthly existence. Because here's what the ancient Egyptians knew that we've forgotten. Death is not something that happens to you. It's something you either pass or fail, depending on how prepared your consciousness is when that moment arrives. Think about this for a second. We spend years preparing for careers, relationships, major life events. We study for exams, train for competitions, rehearse for performances. Yet the one experience that's absolutely guaranteed for every single person, the transition through death, most people spend their entire lives avoiding even thinking about. The Egyptian mystery schools understood something profound. Your physical death is not the end of your existence, but rather the final exam of your consciousness. And like any exam, you can't start preparing when you're already sitting in the testing room. The state of your awareness at the moment your heart stops beating determines everything that follows in those crucial 49 days through the do-it. This is why Thoth taught that earthly life is essentially consciousness boot camp. Every single day you're alive, you're either developing the mental skills you'll need to navigate the afterlife, or you're strengthening the very habits and attachments that will trap you there. Let me give you a specific example of what this looks like. Most people live their entire lives completely identified with their thoughts and emotions. When they're angry, they become anger. When they're sad, they become sadness. When they want something, they become that desire. But in the do-it, every mental movement creates immediate reality. Think of a terrifying monster, and suddenly you're face to face with that monster. Feel overwhelming guilt, and you're instantly trapped in scenarios that amplify that guilt. The Egyptian initiates spent their lives developing what they called witness consciousness, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without becoming them. They would sit in meditation and watch their minds like scientists studying specimens. There's anger arising. There's fear appearing. There's desire manifesting. But they remained the observer, not the observed. This wasn't some abstract spiritual exercise. This was practical preparation for survival in a realm where consciousness operates without the buffer of physical matter. The temples had specific chambers designed to simulate death experiences. Initiates would spend days in complete darkness and silence, learning to remain calm and aware when deprived of all normal sensory input. They practiced what they called dying before death, deliberately entering states where consciousness operates independently of physical sensations and mental chatter. But here's what's fascinating. This preparation didn't make them withdraw from life. It made them engage more fully because they understood something most people miss. The very experiences that challenge us in earthly life are training opportunities for the afterlife. Take attachment, for example. The Egyptians didn't teach that you should avoid loving people or enjoying material pleasures. Instead, they developed a sophisticated understanding of detachment, the ability to experience fully without being controlled by desires and fears. A prepared initiate might deeply love their family, but without the possessive attachment that creates suffering when separation occurs. They might enjoy fine food and beautiful art, but without the addiction that makes happiness dependent on having these things. They might pursue ambitious goals, but without the ego investment that makes failure devastating. This kind of detachment becomes absolutely crucial in the do-it, where you must be willing to surrender everything you think you are in order to merge with the clear light of Ra. The Egyptians also understood that most people fail the afterlife journey not because they're bad people, but because they've spent their lives running from the rejected aspects of their personality, what modern psychology calls shadow work. The Egyptians considered essential preparation for death. Every quality you refuse to acknowledge in yourself, your capacity for anger, selfishness, fear, cruelty, doesn't disappear. It gets pushed into the unconscious where it gains power. In the do-it, these rejected aspects appear as external demons and monsters that seem to attack you, but they're actually parts of yourself that you never learned to integrate. The prepared initiates spent their lifetime consciously confronting these shadow aspects while still alive. They would deliberately examine their capacity for every human emotion and impulse, not to indulge them, but to understand and integrate them. This way, when they encountered these forces in the afterlife, they recognized them as aspects of themselves, rather than external threats. Dream work was another crucial preparation technique. Since the do-it operates according to dream logic, rather than physical laws, initiates train themselves to become lucid in dreams and maintain awareness during sleep states. They learned to navigate non-ordinary reality while their physical body was unconscious. But perhaps the most important preparation was developing what the Egyptians called unconditional love, not as a sentimental feeling, but as a practical tool for dissolving ego boundaries. When you truly love without conditions, you naturally begin to experience yourself as connected to everything, rather than as a separate individual fighting for survival. This becomes essential when facing the clear light of Ra, which represents the dissolution of individual identity into universal consciousness. Most people recoil from this experience because they mistake their personality for their true self. But the prepared initiate recognizes this dissolution as a return home. Here's what's remarkable about these teachings. They don't require you to abandon earthly life or become a monk in some monastery. Instead, they invite you to approach your daily existence with greater consciousness and purpose. Every challenging situation becomes an opportunity to practice non-attachment. Every difficult person becomes a teacher helping you develop patience and compassion. Every loss becomes practice for the ultimate letting go that death requires. The Egyptians understood that consciousness is like a muscle. It grows stronger with use. Every moment you choose awareness over unconsciousness. Every time you observe your mind rather than being lost in it. Every instance where you respond from love rather than fear. Here you are standing on the threshold of the ultimate test that awaits us all. Death is inevitable whether we are ready or not. But how we face that transition, and what lies ahead, depends entirely on the state of consciousness we have cultivated while we have had the time to prepare. If this video has revealed ancient teachings that can change not only how you live but how you die, leave us a comment.